set this up before I get to puzzling. Live, alive, she cried. Alive, she cried. Oh, fuck.
For a number of years, I was a partner in a small commercial laboratory in Monterey. Many strange things happened while we worked, and the following story, which I've called The Snake, happened almost exactly as I've written it. I don't know what it means. The story was finally published, and one of my favorite pieces of fan mail came from a small town librarian. She said it was the worst story she had ever read anywhere. She was upset at its badness. Actually, it isn't a story at all. It's just something that happened, and it goes this way. It was almost dark when young Dr. Phillips swung his sack to his shoulder and left the tide pool. He climbed up over the rocks and squashed along the street in his rubber boots. The street lights were on by the time he arrived at his little commercial laboratory on Gallery Street of Monterey. It was a tight little building, standing partly on piers over the bay and partly on the land. On both sides, corrugated iron sardine canneries crowded in on it. Dr. Phillips climbed the wooden steps, opened the door. The white rats in their cages scampered up and down the wire, and the captive cats in their pens mewed for milk. Dr. Phillips turned on the glaring light over the dissection table and dumped his clammy sack on the floor. He walked to the glass cages by the window where the rattlesnakes lived, leaned over and looked in. The snakes were bunched and resting in the corners of the cage, but every head was clear, and the dusty eyes seemed to look at nothing. And as the young man leaned over the cage, the forked tongue, black on the ends,
Forked tongue?
twittered out and waved slowly up and down. And then the snakes recognized the man and pulled in their tongues. Dr. Phillips threw off his leather coat, built a fire in a tin stove. He set a kettle of water.
This is John Steinbeck. Steinbeck, that is.
And he stood staring at the sack on the floor.
It's actually a very good record.
He was a slight young man.
He was a slight young man.
Bright eyes of one who looked through a microscope a great deal. And he wore short blonde.
Short. Look at that, you know.
The draft ran breathily up the chimney, and a glow of warmth came.
Guess that could be the transom, couldn't it?
The little waves
Yes.
quietly over the piles into milk.
That is a transom piece as well.
Tier of museum jars containing the mounted marine specimens the laboratory dealt in. Dr. Phillips opened a side door, went to his bedroom, a book-lined cell containing an army cot, a reading light, and an uncomfortable wooden chair. He pulled out his rubber boots and put on a pair of sheepskin slippers. When he came back to the other room, the water in the kettle was beginning to hum. He lifted his sack to the table under the white light and emptied out 24 common starfish. These he laid out side by side on the table. His preoccupied eyes turned to the busy rats in the wire cages. Taking grain from a paper sack, he poured it into the feeding trough. And instantly the rats scrambled down from the wire and fell on the food. A bottle of milk stood on a glass shelf between two mounted octopi and jellyfish. Dr. Phillips lifted down the milk, walked to the cat cage. But before he filled the containers, he reached in the cage and gently picked up a big rangy alley cat. He stroked her for a moment, then dropped her in a small black painted box, closed the lid, folded it, and then turned on a pet cot, which had been gassed to the killing chamber. While the short, soft struggle went on in the black box, he filled the sausage with milk. One of the cats arched against his hand. He smiled and petted her neck. The box was quiet now. He turned off the pet cot, for the airtight box would be full of gas.
Jesus Christ.
On the stove, the pan of water was bubbling furiously about the can of beans. Dr. Phillips lifted out the can with a big pair of forceps, opened it, and emptied the beans into a watch glass. While he ate, he looked at the starfish on the table. From between the rays, little drops of milky fluid were exuding. He bolted his beans and When they were gone, he put the dish in the sink and stepped to the equipment cupboard. From this, he took a microscope and a pile of little glass dishes. He filled the dishes one by one with seawater from a tap and arranged them in a line beside the starfish. He took out his watch, laid it on the table under the pouring white light. The waves washed with little sighs against the piles under the floor. He took an eyedropper from a drawer and bent over the starfish. At that moment, there were quick, soft steps on the wooden stairs and a strong knocking at the door. A grimace of annoyance crossed the young man's face as he went to open. A tall, lean woman stood in the doorway. She was dressed in a severe suit. Her straight black hair, growing low on a flat forehead, was mussed as though the wind had been blowing it. Her black eyes glittered in the strong light. She spoke in a soft, throaty voice. "May I come in? I want to talk to you." "I'm very busy just now," he said half-heartedly. "I have things to do at times." And he stood away from the door. The tall woman slipped in. "I'll be quiet until you can talk to me." He closed the door then, brought the uncomfortable chair from the bedroom. "You see," he apologized, "the process has started and I've got to get to it. So many people wander in and ask questions, and I have to explain the common processes. You can tell them without thinking. Sit here," he said. "In a few moments I'll be able to listen to you." The tall woman leaned over the table. With the eyedropper, Dr. Phillips gathered fluid from between the rays of the starfish and squirted it into a bowl of the water. Then he
Light is on.
and squirted it in the same bowl and stirred the water gently with the eyedropper. And he began his little tired patter of explanation. When starfish are sexually mature, they release sperm and ova when they're exposed at low tide. By choosing mature specimens and taking them out of water, I give them a condition of low tide. Now I've mixed sperm and ova. Now I put some of the mixture in each of these 10 watch glasses. In 10 minutes, I will kill the first with menthol. 20 minutes later, I will kill the second. Then a new group every 20 minutes. When I have finished, I will have arrested the process in stages, and I will mount the series on microscope slides for biologic study. He paused. "Would you like to look at this group under the microscope?" "No, thank you," she said. He turned quickly to her. People always wanted to look through the glass. She wasn't looking at the table at all, but at him. Her black eyes were on him, but they didn't seem to see him. He realized why the irises were as dark as the pupils. There was no color line between the two. Dr. Phillips was piqued at her answer, although answering questions bored him. A lack of interest in what he was doing irritated him. He wanted to arouse her. "While I'm waiting the first 10 minutes, I have something to do. Some people don't like to see it. Maybe you better step into that room till I finish." "No," she said in her soft, flat tone. "Do what you wish. I'll wait until you can talk to me."
Do what you wish.
Her hands rested side by side on her lap. She was completely at rest. Her eyes were bright, but the rest of her was almost in a state of suspended animation. He thought, low metabolic rate, almost as low as a frog's from the looks. The desire to shock her out of her inanition possessed him again. He brought a little wooden cradle to the table, laid out scalpels and scissors, and rigged a big hollow needle to a pressure tube. Then from the killing chamber, he brought the limp dead cat, laid it on the cradle, and tied its legs to the hooks on the sides. He glanced sideways at the woman. She had not moved. She was still at rest. The cat grinned into the light, its pink tongue stuck out between its needle teeth. Dr. Phillips deftly snipped open the skin at the throat. With a scalpel, he cut through and found an artery. With flawless technique, he put the needle in the vessel, tied it with gut. "Embalming fluid," he explained. "Later, I'll inject yellow mass into the venous system and red mass into the arterial system for bloodstream dissection." Low biology classes. He looked around at her again. Her dark eyes seemed veiled with dust. She looked without expression at the cat's open throat. Not a drop of blood had escaped. The incision was clean. Dr. Phillips looked at his watch. "It's time for the first group." He shook a few crystals of menthol into the first watch glass. The woman was making him very nervous. The rats climbed about on the wire of their cages and squeaked softly. The waves under the building beat with little shocks on the piles.
That one is not too dark.
Shivered. He put a few lumps of coal in the stove and sat down. "Now," he said, "I have nothing to do for 20 minutes. He noticed how short her chin was between upper lip and point. She seemed to awaken slowly, to come out of some deep pool of consciousness. Her head raised and her dark, dusty eyes moved about the room and came back to him. I was waiting, she said, and her hands remained side by side on her lap. You have snakes? Well, yes, he said rather loudly. I have 24 rattlesnakes. I milk out the venom and send it to the anti-venom laboratories. She continued to look at him, but her eyes did not settle on him. Rather, they covered him and seemed to see in a big circle all around it. Have you a male snake?
Does
A male
that
rattlesnake?
go there? You gotta be kidding me.
Well, it just happens I know I have. I came in one morning and found
Right.
a big snake.
The border is almost
It
done.
was a smaller one. That's very rare in captivity. You know I have a male snake. Where is he? Well, right in the glass cage by the window there. Her head swung slowly around, but her two quiet hands did not move. She turned back to him. May I see? He got up and walked to the case by the window. In the sand bottom of the cage, a knot of rattlesnakes lay entwined, but their heads stuck out clear. The tongues came out, flicked a moment, and waved up and down, sealing the air for vibrations. Dr. Phillips nervously turned his head. The woman was standing beside him. He had not heard her get up from her chair. He had heard only the splash of water among the piles and the scampering of rats. She said softly, which is the snake you spoke of? He pointed to a thick, dusty, gray snake lying by itself in one corner of the cage. That one, he's nearly 5 feet long. He comes from Texas. Our Pacific Coast snakes are usually smaller. He's been taking all the rats, too. When I want the others to eat, I have to take him out.
Oh, shit.
The woman stared down at the blunt, dry head. The forked tongue slipped out and hung and quivered for a long moment. And you're sure he's a male? Rattlesnakes are funny, he said glibly. Nearly every generalization proves wrong. I don't like to say anything definite about rattlesnakes, but yes, I can assure you he's a male. Her eyes did not move from the flat head. Will you sell him to me? Sell him, he said. Sell him to you. You do sell specimens, don't you? Oh, yes, of course I do. Of course I do. How much? $5? 10? Oh, not more than 5. But do you know anything about rattlesnakes? You might be bitten. She looked at him for a moment. I don't intend to take him. I want to leave him here. But I want him to be mine. I want to come here and look at him and feed him and know he's mine. She opened a little purse and took out a $5 bill. Here, now he's mine. Dr. Phillips began to be afraid.
Yeah, you should be.
Come in and look at him without owning him. I want him to be mine, she said.
I love
Dorothy
him.
cried, I've forgotten the time. They ran to the table. 3 minutes over. It won't matter much, he said. And he shook menthol crystals into the second watch glass. And then he was drawn back to the cage, where the woman still stared at the snake. She asked, what does he eat? I feed them white rats from the cage over there. Will you put him in the other cage? I want to feed him. He doesn't need food. He's had a rat already this week. Sometimes they don't eat for 3 or 4 months. I had one that didn't eat for over a year. In her low monotone, she asked, would you sell me a rat? He shrugged his shoulders. I see. You want to watch how rattlesnakes eat? All right, I'll show you.
You sell me a rat.
25 cents. It's better than a bullfight if you look at it one way. And it's simply a snake eating his dinner if you look at it another way. His tone had become acid. He hated people who made a sport of natural processes. He was not a sportsman. He could kill 1,000 animals for knowledge, but not an insect for pleasure. He'd been over this in his mind before. She turned her head slowly toward him, and the beginning of a smile formed on her thin lips. I want to feed my snake, she said. I'll put him in the other cage. She had opened the top of the cage and dipped her hand in before he knew what she was doing. He leaped forward and pulled her back, and the lid banged shut. Haven't you any sense, he said fiercely. Maybe he wouldn't kill you, but he'd make you damn sick in spite of what I could do for you. You put him in the other cage then, she said quietly. Dr. Phillips was shaken. He found that he was avoiding the dark eye that didn't seem to look at anything. He thought it was profoundly wrong to put a rat into the cage, deeply sinful, and he didn't know why. Often he'd put rats in the cage when someone or other had wanted to see it, but this desire tonight sickened him. He tried to explain himself out of it. It's a good thing to see, he said. It shows you how a snake can work. It makes you have respect for a rattlesnake. Then, too, lots of people have dreams about the terror of snakes making the kill. I think because it is a subjective rat. The person is the rat. Once you see it, the whole matter is objective. The rat is only a rat, and the terror is removed. He took a long stick equipped with a leather noose from the wall, opened the trap, dropped the noose over the big snake's head, and tightened the thong. A piercing, dry rattle filled the room. The thick body writhed and slashed about the handle of the stick as he lifted the snake out and dropped it in the feeding cage. It stood ready to strike for a time, but the buzzing gradually ceased, and the snake crawled into a corner, made a big figure eight with his body, and lay still. You see, Dr. Phillips explained, these snakes are quite tame. I've had them a long time. I suppose I can handle them if I wanted to, but everyone who does handle rattlesnakes gets bitten sooner or later. I just don't want to take a chance. He glanced at the woman. He hated to put in a rat. He moved over in front of the new cage, and her black eyes were on the stony head of the snake again. She said, put in a rat. Reluctantly, he went to the rat cage.
Sick woman.
He was sorry for the rat, and such a feeling had never come to him before. His eyes went over the mass of swarming white bodies climbing up the screen. Which one, he thought, which one should it be? And suddenly he turned angrily to the woman. Would you rather I put in a cat? Then you'd see a real fight. A cat might even win. But if it did, it might kill the snake. I'll sell you a cat if you like. She didn't look at him, put in a rat. She said, I want to see him eat. He opened the rat cage and thrust his hand in, and his fingers found a tail. He lifted a plump, red-eyed rat out of the cage, struggled up to try to bite his fingers, and failing, hung spread out and motionless from his tail. He walked quickly across the room, opened the feeding cage, dropped the rat on the sand floor. Now watch it, he cried. The woman didn't answer. Her eyes were on the snake where it lay still, his tongue flicking in and out, rapidly tasting the air of the cage. The rat landed on his feet, turned around, sniffed at his pink naked tail, and then unconcernedly trotted across the sand, smelling as it went. The room was silent. Dr. Phillips did not know whether the water sighed among the piles or whether the woman sighed. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw her body crouch and stiffen. The snake moved out smoothly, slowly. The tongue flicked in and out. The motion was so gradual, so smooth, that it didn't seem to be motion at all. In the other end of the cage, the rat perked up a little in a sitting position and began to lick down the fine white hair on his chest. The snake moved on, keeping always an escort in his neck. The silence beat on the young man. He felt the blood drifting up in his body. He said loudly, see, he keeps the striking curve ready. Rattlesnakes are cautious, almost cowardly. The mechanism is so delicate. The snake's dinner is to be got by an operation as deft as a surgeon's job. He takes no chances with his instruments. The snake had flowed to the middle of the cage by now. The rat looked up and saw the snake and then unconcernedly went back to licking his chest. It's the most beautiful thing in the world, the young man said, and his veins were throbbing. It's the most terrible thing in the world. The snake was very close now. Its head lifted a few inches from the sand. The head weaved slowly back and forth, aiming, getting distance, aiming. Dr. Phillips glanced again at the woman, and he turned sick, for she was weaving too, or just slightly weaving. The rat looked up and saw the snake. It dropped on 4 feet and backed up, and then the stroke. It was impossible to see, simply a flash. The rat jarred as though under an invisible blow. The snake backed hurriedly away into the corner from which it had come and settled down, his tongue working constantly. Perfect, Dr. Phillips cried, right between the shoulder blades. The fang must almost have reached the heart. Now the rat stood still, breathing, like a little white bellows. And suddenly it leaped in the air and landed on its side. The snake kicked spasmodically a second and it was dead. The woman relaxed sleepily. Well, the young man demanded, it was an emotional bath, wasn't it? She turned her dusky eyes to him. Will he eat it now, she asked. Of course he'll eat it. He didn't kill it for a thrill. He killed it because he was hungry. The corners of the woman's mouth turned up a trifle again and she looked at the snake. I want to see him eat it. Now the snake came out of its corner again. There was no striking curve in its neck, but it approached the rat gingerly, ready to jump back in case it attacked. It nudged the body gently with its blunt nose and drew away. Finally satisfied that it was dead, the snake touched the body all over with his chin, from head to tail. It seemed to measure the body and to kiss it. Finally it opened its mouth and unhinged its jaws at the corners. Dr. Phillips put his will against his head to keep keep it from turning toward the woman. He thought, if she's opening her mouth, I'll be sick. I'll be afraid. And he succeeded in keeping his eyes away from her. The snake fitted its jaws over the rat's head, and then, with a slow peristaltic pulsing, began to engulf the rat. The jaws gripped, and the whole throat crawled up, and the jaws gripped again. Dr. Phillips turned away and went to his work table. You've made me miss one of the series, he said bitterly. The set won't be complete. He put the watch glasses under the low-power microscope and looked at it. And then angrily he poured the contents of all the dishes in the sink. The waves had fallen so that only a wet whisper came up from the floor. The young man lifted a trapdoor at his feet and dropped the starfish down into the black water. He paused at the cat crucified on the cradle and grinning comically into the light. His body was puffed with embalming fluid. He shut off the pressure, withdrew the needle, and tied the vein. Would you like some coffee, he asked. No, thank you. I shall be going pretty soon. He walked to her, where she stood in front of the snake cage. The rat was swallowed, all except an inch of pink tail that stuck out of the snake's mouth like a sardonic tongue. The throat heaved again, and the tail disappeared. The jaws snapped back in their sockets, and the big snake crawled heavily into a corner, made a big figure eight, and dropped his head on the sand. He's asleep now, the woman said. I'm going now. But I'll come back and I'll feed my snake every little while. I'll pay for the rats. I want him to have plenty. Sometime I'll take him away with me. Her eyes came out of the dusty dream for a moment. Remember, he's mine. Don't take his poison. I want him to have it. Good night. She walked swiftly to the door and went out. He heard her footsteps on the stairs, but he could not hear her walk away on the pavement. Dr. Phillips turned a chair around and sat down in front of the snake cage. He tried to comb out his thoughts as he looked at the torpid snake. I've read so much about psychological sex symbols, he thought. It doesn't seem to explain. Maybe I'm too much alone. Maybe I should kill the snake. If I knew... No, I can't pray to him. For weeks he expected her to return. I'll go out and leave her alone when she comes back, he decided. I won't see that damn thing again. But she never came again. For months he looked for her when he walked about in the town. Several times he ran after a tall woman, thinking it might be she. But he never saw her again, ever.
That's it? That was an abrupt ending.
This is a story about a monster named Johnny Beer. He really lived in Central California. I knew him. He caused a great deal of trouble before he was through. The village of Loma is built, as its name implies, on a low, round hill that rises like an island out of the flat mouth of the Salinas Valley in Central California. To the north and east of the town, a black tule swamp stretches for miles, but to the south, the marsh has been drained. Rich vegetable land has been the result of the draining, and the lettuce and cauliflowers grow to be giants. The owners of the swamp to the north of the village began to cover the black land. They banded together and formed a reclamation district. I worked for a company that took the contract to put a ditch through. The floating clamshell dredger arrived, was put together, and started eating a ditch of open water through the swamp. There aren't more than 200 people in Loma. The Methodist Church has the highest place on the hill. Its spire is visible for miles. 2 groceries, a hardware store, an ancient Masonic hall, and the Buffalo Bar. And that's Loma. On the side of the hills are the small wooden houses of the population, and on the rich southern flats are the houses of the landowners. Small yards, usually enclosed by high walls of clipped cypress to keep out the driving afternoon winds. There was nothing to do in Loma in the evening except to go to the saloon. An old board building with swinging doors and a wooden sidewalk awning. Neither prohibition nor repeal had changed its business, its clientele, nor the quality of its whiskey. In the course of an evening, every male inhabitant of Loma, over 15 years old, came at least once to the Buffalo Bar, had a drink, and talked a while, and went home. Fat Carl, the owner and bartender, greeted every newcomer with a phlegmatic sullenness which nevertheless inspired familiarity and affection. His face was sour, his tone downright unfriendly. And yet, I don't know how he did it. I know I felt gratified and warm when Fat Carl knew me well enough to turn his pig face to me and say with impatience, "What's it going to be?" He always asked that, although he served only whiskey and only one kind of whiskey. I've seen him flatly refuse to squeeze some lemon juice into it for a stranger. Fat Carl didn't like comedians. He wore a big towel tied around his middle. He polished the glasses on it as he moved about. The floor was bare wood, sprinkled with sawdust. The bar an old store counter, and the chairs hard and straight. The only decorations were the posters and cards and pictures stuck to the wall by candidates for county elections, salesmen and auctioneers. Some of these were many years old. The card of Sheriff Ritto still begged for re-election, although Ritto had been dead for 7 years. Buffalo Bar sounds even to me like a terrible place. But when you walked down the night street over the wooden sidewalks, and the long streamers of swamp fog, like waving dirty plumbing, slapped in your face, and when finally you pushed open the swinging doors of Fat Carl's and saw men sitting around talking and drinking, and Fat Carl coming along toward you, it seemed pretty nice. At least you couldn't get away from it. There'd be a game of the mildest kind of poker going on. Timothy Raps would be playing solitaire, cheating pretty badly because he took a drink only when he got it out. I've seen him get it out 5 times in a row. When he won, he piled the cards neatly, stood up, and walked with great dignity to the bar. Fat Carl, with a glass half filled before he arrived, asked, "What'll it be?" "Whiskey," said Timothy gravely. In the long room, men from the farms and the town sat in straight hard chairs and stood against the wall counter. A soft, monotonous rattle of conversation went on, except at times of elections or prize fights, when there might be orations or loud opinions. Soon after my arrival in Loma, I scraped acquaintance with May Romero, a pretty half-Mexican girl. Sometimes in the evenings I walked with her down to the south of the hill until the nasty fog drove us back into town. After I escorted her home, I dropped in at the bar for a while. I was sitting in the bar one night talking to Alex Hartnell, who owned a nice little farm. We were talking about bass fishing when the front door opened and swung closed. A hush fell on the men in the room. Alex nudged me and said, "It's Johnny Bear."
Oh, no.
His name described him better than I can. He looked like a great, stupid, smiling bear. His black matted head bobbed forward and his long arms hung out as though he'd been on all fours and was only standing upright as a trick. His legs were short and bowed and ended with strange, square feet. He was dressed in dark blue denim, but his feet were bare. They didn't seem to be crippled or deformed in any way. They were just squares, wide as they were long. He stood in the doorway, swinging his arms, the way half-wits do. On his face was a foolish, happy smile. He moved forward. For all his bulk and clumsiness, he seemed to creep. He didn't move like a man, but like a bear. At the bar, he stopped, and his little eyes went about from face to face. And he said, "Whiskey? Whiskey for Johnny?" Loma was not a treating town. A man might buy a drink for another if he were pretty sure the other would immediately buy one for him. I was surprised when one of the quiet men slid a coin down the counter. Fat Carl filled a glass. The monster took it and gulped the whiskey. "What the devil?" I began, and Alex nudged me and said, "Shh." There began a curious pantomime. Johnny Bear moved to the door and then he came creeping back. The smile never left his face. In the middle of the room, he crouched down on his stomach, and a voice came from his throat. The voice seemed familiar to me. "You are too beautiful to live in a dirty little town like this." The voice rose to a soft, throaty tone with just a trace of accent in the words. "You just tell me that." I nearly fainted. It was my own voice coming out of the throat of Johnny Bear. My own words, my own intonation. And then it was the voice of May Romero, exact. If I had not seen the crouching man on the floor, I would have called to her. And the dialogue went on. These things sound silly when somebody else says them. Johnny Bear went right on, or rather, I should say, I went right on. And he said things and made sounds. Gradually, the faces of the men turned from Johnny Bear and turned toward me, and they grinned at me. I couldn't do anything. I knew if I tried to stop him, I'd have a fight on my hands, so the scene went on to a finish. And when it was over, I was awfully glad May Romero had no brothers. I think the men in the bar were sorry for me. They looked away from me and talked telepathically to one another. Johnny Bear went to the back of the room, crawled under a round card table, curled up like a dog, and went to sleep. Alex Hartnell was regarding me with compassion. First time you ever heard him? Yes, what in hell is he? Alex ignored my question for a moment. If you're worrying about May's reputation, don't. Johnny Bear's followed May before. But how did he hear us? I didn't see him. No one sees or hears Johnny Bear when he's on business. He can move like no movement at all. You know what our young men do when they go out with girls? They take a dog. Dogs are afraid of Johnny. They can smell him coming. But good God, those voices. Alex said, I know. Some of us rode up to the university about Johnny. Young man came down, took a look, and he told us about Blind Tom. You ever heard of Blind Tom? No, I haven't. Well, Blind Tom was a Negro half-wit. He could hardly talk, but he could imitate anything he heard on the piano, long pieces. They tried him with musicians, and he reproduced not only the music, but every little personal emphasis. To catch him, they made little mistakes, and he played the mistakes. He photographed the thing in the tiniest detail. The man said Johnny Bear is the same, only he photographed words and voices. He tested Johnny with a passage in Greek, and Johnny did it exactly. He doesn't know the words he's saying, he just says them. He hasn't brains enough to make anything up, so you know what he says is true. Why does he do it? Why is he interested in listening if he doesn't understand? He isn't, said Alex. He loves whiskey. He knows if he listens in windows and comes and repeats what he hears, somebody will give him whiskey. I said, it's funny somebody hadn't shot him while he was peeking in the window. Alex picked up his cigarette. Lots of people have tried, but they just don't see Johnny Bear. You can't catch him. You keep your windows closed, and even then you're talking a whisper if you don't want to be repeated. You were lucky it was dark tonight. If he'd seen you, he might have gone through the action. I looked at the sprawled figure under the table. The light fell on his black matted hair. I saw a big fly land on his head, and then I swear I saw the whole scalp shiver the way the skin of a horse shivers when the fly lands on it. The fly landed again, and the moving scalp shook it off again. Conversation in the room had settled to a bored monotone. Alex beside me said, have a drink. We walked to the counter, and Fat Carl put out 2 glasses. What'll it be? Carl's head twitched back toward the card table. He got you, didn't he? I winked at him. I'll take a dog next time. Johnny Bear rolled over on his stomach. His face looked out at the room. And he came sliding out like an animal. Whiskey? Whiskey? It was like a bird call. Whiskey?
Whiskey?
The conversation in the room started, but nobody came forward with money. Johnny Bear smiled plaintively. Whiskey? And then he tried coaxing them. Out of his throat, an angry woman's voice issued. I tell you, with all bone, 20 cents a pound and all bone. Oh, man, yes, ma'am, I didn't know it. I'll give you some sausage to make it up.
Sausage?
But none of the men offered to come forward. Johnny crept to the front of the room and crouched. I said, what's he doing? Alex said, shh. A woman's voice came, a cold, sure voice. The words clipped. I don't understand it. Are you some kind of monster? I wouldn't have believed if I hadn't seen you. And another woman's voice answered, her voice low and hoarse. Maybe I am a monster. I can't help it. You must help it, the cold voice broke in. You'd be better dead. A soft sobbing came from the thick, smiling lips of Johnny Bear. The men were stiff and listening. The sobbing stopped. Haven't you ever felt that way? The cold voice announced, certainly not. Never in the night, never, ever in your life? If I had, said the cold voice, if I ever had, I'd cut that part of me away. Stop your whining at me. I won't stand it. Go to your prayers. Johnny Bear smiled on and said, whiskey?
Whiskey?
And he smiled at the room, and then he went out with that creeping gait of his. Conversation didn't spring up again. Everyone in the room seemed to have a problem settled in his own mind. One by one, they drifted out, and the back swing of the doors brought in little puffs of tutti fog. Alex got up and walked out, and I followed him. The night was nasty with fog. It seemed to cling to the buildings, to reach out with free arms into the air. I doubled my pace and caught up with Alex. What is that, man? What is all that about? For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer, but then he stopped and he turned to me. Oh, damn it, listen. Every town has its aristocrats. It's a family above reproach. Emmeline and Amy Hawkins are our aristocrats. Their father was a congressman. I don't know why Johnny does this. They feed him. We shouldn't give him whiskey. I asked, are they relatives of yours? No, but they aren't like other people. They have the farm next to mine. Two maiden ladies, some Chinese farm it on shares. Why, the Hawkins women, they're symbols. They're what we tell our kids when we want to describe good people. Well, I protested. Nothing Johnny Bear said would hurt them, would it? I don't know. I don't know. I'm going to bed, he said. About 8 the next morning, I walked down across the swamp to the dredger. The crew was busy bending some new wire to the drums and coiling the worn cable for removal. I looked over the job and at 11 o'clock walked back to Loma. In front of Mrs. Ratt's boarding house, Alex Hartnell sat in the Model T Ford touring car. He called to me. I was just going out to the dredger to get you. I knocked off a couple of chickens this morning. Thought you might like to come and help with them. I accepted joyfully. As we drove along the road, Alex shouted, "Remember about the Hawkinses?" Of course I remember. He pointed ahead. That's their house. Little of the house could be seen, for a high, thick hedge of cypress surrounded it. It must be a small garden inside the square, too. Only the roof and the tops of the windows showed over the hedge. I could see the house was painted tan, trimmed with dark brown, a combination favored for railroad stations and schools in California. There were two wicket gates in front and side of the hedge. The hedge was clipped square, and it looked strong and thick. "It keeps the wind out," Alex shouted. "Doesn't keep Johnny Bear out," I said. He waved at a whitewashed square building standing out in the field. "That's where the Chink sharecroppers live." At that moment, from behind the corner of the hedge, a horse and buggy turned into the road. The gray horse was old but well groomed, and the buggy shiny and the harness polished. There was a big silver H on the outside of each blank. It seemed to me that the check rein was too short for such an old horse. Alex said, "There they are now on their way to church." We took off our hats and bowed to the women as they went by, and they nodded formally to us. I had a good look at them. They looked almost exactly as I thought they would. Johnny Bear was more monstrous than I had known. If by the tone of voice he could describe the features of people. I didn't have to ask which was Emily and which was Amy. The clear, straight eyes, the sharp chin, the mouth cut with the precision of a diamond, the stiff, curveless figure, that was Emily. Amy was very like her, but unlike. Her edges were soft, her eyes were warm, and her mouth full. And there was a swell to her breast, and yet she did look like Emmeline. But whereas Emmeline's mouth was straight by nature, Amy held her mouth straight. Emmeline must have been 50 to 55, and Amy maybe 10 years younger. I had only a moment to look at them, and I never saw them again. A place like Loma, with its fogs, with its great swamp, like a hideous sin, really needed the Hawkins women. I could see that. It was a good dinner at Alex's. His sister fried the chicken and butter and did everything else right. We sat around in the dining room and drank really good brandy. I said, "I don't see why we ever go to the Buffalo. That whiskey is..." "I know it is," said Alex. "But the Buffalo is the mind of Loma. It's a newspaper. It's our club." This was so true that when Alex started the Ford and prepared to take me back, I knew and he knew that we would go for an hour or two to the Buffalo Bar. We were nearly into town. The feeble lights of the car splashed about on the road. Another car rattled toward us, and Alex swung across the road and stopped. "It's Dr. Holmes," he explained. The oncoming car pulled up because it couldn't get around us. Alex called, "Say, Doc, I was going to ask you to take a look at my sister. She's got a swelling on her throat." Dr. Holmes called back, "All right, Alex, I'll take a look, but pull out, will you? I'm in a hurry." Alex was delivered to sick doc. "Why, Miss Amy had a little spell. Get out of the way, will you?" We drove on. I was about to remark that the night was clear when, looking ahead, I saw rags of fog creeping around the hill from the swamp side and climbing like slow snakes on top of Loma. Ford shuddered to a stop in front of the Buffalo, and we went in. Fat Carl moved toward us, wiping a glass, and he reached under the bar for the nearby bottle. "What'll it be?" he asked. "Whiskey." For a moment, a smile seemed to flit on his sullen, fat face. The room was full. My dressing room was there. But it was the quietest bar I ever saw. Somehow the sullen, baleful eye of Fat Carl made making a quiet, efficient business. Timothy Ratt playing solitaire at one of the round tables. The doors unfolded silently, and Johnny Bear crept in. His were like cat's feet. Whiskey chirped, and no one encouraged him. He went down on his stomach the way he had got me, and sing-song nasal words came out. Chinese, I thought. And then it seemed to me that the same words were repeated in another voice, slower, not nasally. Johnny Bear raised his shaggy head and he asked, "Whiskey?" I stood a quarter along the bar and Johnny gulped his drink. And the chill voice of Emmeline said, "She's in here, Doctor." She said, "A fainting fit." "Yes, Doctor." There was a little pause in the doctor's voice, very softly. "Why did she do it, Emmeline?" "Why did she do what?" "I'm your doctor, Emmeline. I was your father's doctor. Don't you think I've seen that kind of mark before? How long was she hanging?" There was a longer pause then, and the chill left the woman's voice. 2 or 3 minutes. "Will she be all right?" "Oh, yes, she'll come around." "Why did she do it?" The answering voice was even colder than it had been at first. "I don't know, sir." "You mean you won't tell me?" "I mean what I say." And the doctor's voice went on, giving directions for treatment, rest, milk, and a little whiskey. "Above all, be gentle," he said. "Be gentle with her." Emmeline's voice trembled a little. "You would never tell, Doctor?" "Of course I won't tell. I'll send you some sedatives." Whiskey, and my eyes jerked open, and there was the horrible Johnny Bear smiling around the room. The next morning, one of those series of accidents so common in construction landed on us. One of the new wires parted on the in-swing and dropped the bucket on one of the pontoons, sinking it, and the works in 8 feet of ditch water. When we dropped a dead man and got a line out to it to pull us from the water, the line parted and clipped the legs neatly off one of the deckhands. We bound the stumps and rushed into Salinas. My contact with the social life of Loma went to pot for a while, but when the bucket was banging in the mud again, and the big diesel was chuttering away in the swamp, I walked up to Alex Hartnell's farm one night. Passing the Hawkins place, I peered in through one of the little wicket gates in the cypress hedge. The house was dark, more dark, because a low light glowed in one window. There was a gentle wind that night, blowing balls of fog like tumbleweeds along the ground. I walked in the clear a moment, and then was swallowed in the mist. And then it was clear again. In the starlight, I could see the silver fog balls moving like elementals across the fields. When I came suddenly out of the fog, I saw a dark figure hurrying along in the field, and I knew from the dragging footsteps it must be one of the Chinese field hands, walking in sandals. Alex seemed glad to see me. His sister was away. I sat down at his stove, and he brought out a bottle of that nice brandy. "I heard you were having some trouble," he said. "Yeah, the men have got figured out accidents come in groups of 3, 5, 7, and 9. Alex nodded. I feel that way myself. "How are the Hawkins sisters?" I asked. He didn't want to talk about them, but at the same time he wanted to talk about them. "I stepped over about a week ago. Miss Amy isn't feeling very well. I didn't see her. I only saw Miss Emmeline." "You almost seem to be related to them," I said. "Well, their father and my father were friends. We called the girls Aunt Amy and Aunt Emmeline. They can't do anything bad. It wouldn't be good for any of us if the Hawkins sisters weren't the Hawkins sisters." "The community conscience?" I asked. "The safe thing," he said. "The place where a kid can get gingerbread. They believe in the things we hope are true, and they live. So, when there's no honesty, really is the best policy, and charity really is its own reward." And he said, "Miss Emmeline is fighting something, and I don't think she's going to win." "What do you mean?" "I don't know what I mean." "Oh, I should shoot Johnny Bear and throw him in the swamp." "It's not his fault." I walked back to Loma. It seemed to me that the fog was clinging to the cypress hedge of the Hawkins house, and it seemed to me also that a lot of the fog balls were clustered about, and others were moving slowly in. In the evening of the second day after my visit to Alex, I walked down the wooden sidewalk, trailing a streamer of fog behind me, and went into the Buffalo Bar. Fat Carl came toward me, and I cried whiskey before he had a chance to ask what it would be. I took my glass and went to one of the straight chairs. Alex was not there. At about 10 o'clock, the news came. Miss Amy committed suicide. She hanged herself. The swinging doors opened slowly, and there was Johnny Bear, creeping in, and he said, "Whiskey, whiskey for Johnny." Fat Carl poured him it very quickly. Johnny Bear gulped it. The doctor's tone was harsh. "Where is she, Emmeline?" I've never heard a voice like the one that answered. Cold control, layer and layer of control. "She's in here, Doctor." A long pause. "She was hanging quite a while. I don't know how long, Doctor." "Why did she do it, Emmeline?" The monotone again. "I don't know, Doctor." A longer pause, and then, "Emmeline, did you know she was going to have a baby?" "Yes, Doctor." "Is that why you didn't find her for so long?" "No, Emmeline, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that." "Can you make out a certificate without mentioning it?" "Of course I can. I'll speak to the undertaker, too." "Thank you, Doctor." "And whiskey for Johnny, whiskey." Fat Carl poured another glass, and Johnny Bear drank it, and then he crept to the back of the room and crawled under the table and went to sleep. No one spoke. The men moved up to the bar and laid down their coins silently. They looked bewildered, persistent with pause. A few minutes later, Alex came into the silent room, and he walked quickly over to me. "You heard?" he said softly. "Yes." I said, "Did you know she was pregnant?" Alex stiffened. He looked around the room and back at me. "Johnny Bear?" he asked. I nodded.
Jesus
Alex
Christ.
over his eyes. "I don't believe it." I was about to answer when I heard a little scuffle and looked to the back of the room and saw Johnny Bear crawl like a badger out of his hole. He came to the bar. "Whiskey," he said. He smiled expectantly at Fat Carl. Then Alex stepped out and he said, "Now you guys listen. I've had enough of this. I don't want any more of it. Whiskey for Johnny?" Alex turned on the idiot. "You ought to be ashamed. Miss Amy gave you food. She gave you all the clothes you ever had." And Johnny smiled at him and said, "Whiskey?" He got all these tricks, and I heard again the sing-song nasal language that sounded like Chinese. Alex looked relieved, and then the other voice, slow, hesitant, repeating the words, but without the nasal quality. Alex moved so quickly I didn't see him move. He splashed his fist into Johnny Bear's smiling mouth. Johnny Bear recovered his balance. His lips were split, but the smile was still there. His arms enfolded Alex as the tentacles of an anemone enfold a crab. Alex bent backward. I jumped in and grabbed one of the arms and wrenched at it, but couldn't tear it loose. And Fat Carl came rolling over the counter with a bung starter in his hand. He beat the matted head until the arms relaxed, and Johnny Bear crumpled. I helped Alex to a chair, and I asked, "Are you hurt?" He tried to get his breath. "Well, back's punched, I guess," he said. "I'll drive you home." The editor was left at the Hawkins place as we went by. I got Alex to his own dark house and helped him to bed and poured a hot brandy into him. He hadn't spoken all the way home. But after he was propped in bed, he said, "You don't think anyone noticed, do you?" I caught him in time, didn't I? "What are you talking about? Why'd you hit him?" "Well, listen," he said, "I'll have to stay close for a little while with his back. But if you hear anyone say anything, stop it. Don't let it go. Don't let them say it." "I don't know what you're talking about." He looked at me for a long moment. And he said, "Well, you know that second voice? That was Miss Amy."
Oh my God, was she a ghost? Must have been, buddy. Or wait, Johnny Bear was mimicking Miss Amy. Creepy. Very creepy. All right, what shall we listen to now? I will find something. About Tanglewood Tales. The story of Pluto and Prosperina. Should have started this one long ago.
Mother Ceres was exceedingly fond of her daughter, Proserpina, and seldom let her go alone into the fields. But just at the time when my story begins, the good lady was very busy. because she had the care of the wheat and the Indian corn,
Wheat.
the rye and barley, and in short of the crops of every kind all over the earth. And as the season had thus far been uncommonly backward, it was necessary to make the harvest ripen more speedily than usual. So she put on her turban, made of poppies, a kind of flower which she was always noted for wearing, and got into her car drawn by a pair of winged dragons, and was just ready to set off. "Dear mother," said Persephone,
Dear
"I
mother.
shall be very lonely while you're away. May I not run down to the shore and ask some of the sea nymphs to come up out of the waves and play with me?" "Yes, child," answered Mother Ceres. "The sea nymphs are good creatures, and will never lead you into any harm. But you must take care not to stray away from them, nor go wandering about the fields by yourself. Young girls without their mothers to take care of them are very apt to get into mischief." The child promised to be as prudent as if she were a grown-up woman. And by the time the winged dragons had whirled the car out of sight, she was already on the shore calling to the sea nymphs to come and play with her. They knew Prosperina's voice, and were not long in showing their glistening faces and sea-green hair above the water, at the bottom of which was their home. They brought along with them a great many beautiful shells, and sitting down on the moist sand where the surf wave broke over them, they busied themselves in making a necklace, which they hung round Proserpina's neck. By way of showing her gratitude, the child besought them to go with her a little way into the fields, so that they might gather abundance of flowers, with which she would make each of her kind playmates a wreath. "Oh no, dear Proserpina," cried the sea nymphs, "we dare not go with you upon the dry land. We are apt to grow faint, unless at every breath we can snuff up the salt breeze of the ocean. And don't you see how careful we are to let the surf wave break over us every moment or two, so as to keep ourselves comfortably moist? If it were not for that, we should soon look like bunches of uprooted seaweed dried in the sun." "It's a great pity," said Proserpina. "But do you wait for me here, and I will run and gather my apron full of flowers, and be back again before the surf wave has broken 10 times over you. I long to make you some wreaths that will be as lovely as this necklace of many-colored shells." "We will wait then," answered the sea nymphs. "But while you are gone, we may as well lie down on a bank of soft sponge under the water. The air today is a little too dry for our comfort, but we will pop up our heads every few minutes to see if you're coming." The young Proserpina ran quickly to a spot where only the day before she had seen a great many flowers. These, however, were now a little past their bloom, and wishing to give her friends the freshest and loveliest blossoms, she strayed farther into the fields, and found some that made her scream with delight. Proserpina's apron was soon filled and brimming over with delightful blossoms. She was on the point of turning back in order to rejoin the sea nymphs and sit with them on the moist sand, all twining wreaths together. But a little farther on, what did she behold? It was a large shrub, completely covered with the most magnificent flowers in the world. "The darlings!" cried Proserpina, and then she thought to herself, "I was looking at that spot only a moment ago. How strange it is that I did not see the flowers." The nearer she approached the shrub, the more attractive it looked, until she came quite close to it. And then, although its beauty was richer than words can tell, she hardly knew whether to like it or not. It bore above 100 flowers of the most brilliant hues, and each different from the others, but all having a kind of resemblance among themselves, which showed them to be sister blossoms. But there was a deep, glossy luster on the leaves of the shrub and on the petals of the flowers that made Proserpina doubt whether they might not be poisonous. To tell you the truth, foolish as it may seem, she was half inclined to turn around and run away. "What a silly child I am," thought she, taking courage. "It is really the most beautiful shrub that ever sprang out of the earth. I will pull it up by the roots and carry it home and plant it in my mother's garden." Holding up her apron full of flowers with her left hand, Proserpina seized the large shrub with the other and pulled, but was hardly able to loosen the soil about its roots. fruited plant it was.
Yes.
Again, the girl pulled with all her might and observed that the earth began to stir and crack to some distance around the stem. She gave another pull, but relaxed her hold, fancying that there was a rumbling sound right
That was
beneath
my
her
stomach.
feet. Did the roots extend down into some enchanted cavern? Then, laughing at herself for so childish a notion, she made another effort. Up came the shock, and Proserpina staggered back, holding the stem triumphantly in her hand, and gazing at the deep hole which its roots had left in the soil. Much to her astonishment, this hole kept spreading wider
And wider.
and growing deeper and deeper until it really seemed to have no bottom.
Bottom.
All the while, there came a rumbling noise out of its depths, louder and louder, and nearer and nearer, and sounding like a tramp of horses' hoofs and the rattling of wheels. Too much frightened to run away, she stood, straining her eyes into this wonderful cavity, and soon saw a team of 4 sable horses, snorting smoke out of their nostrils, and tearing their way out of the earth with a splendid golden chariot whirling at their heels. They leaped out of the bottomless hole, chariot and all, and there they were, tossing their black manes, flourishing their black tails,
Flourishing.
and curvetting with every one of their hoofs off the ground at once, close by the spot where Proserpina stood. In the chariot sat the figure of a man, richly dressed, with a crown on his head, all flaming with diamonds.
Flaming.
He was of a noble aspect, and rather handsome, but looked sullen and discontented, and he kept rubbing his eyes and shading them with his hand, as if he did not live enough in the sunshine to be very fond of its light. As soon as this personage saw the affrighted Proserpina, he beckoned her to come a little nearer. "Do not be afraid," said he, with as cheerful a smile as he knew how to put on. "Come, will not you like to ride a little way with me in my beautiful chariot?" But Proserpina was so alarmed that she wished for nothing but to get out of his reach. And no wonder. The stranger did not look remarkably good-natured in spite of his smile. And as for his voice, its tones were deep and stern, and sounded as much like the rumbling of an earthquake underground as anything else. As is always the case with children in trouble, Proserpina's first thought was to call for her mother. "Mother! Mother Ceres!" cried she, all in a tremble. "Come quickly and save me!" But her voice was too faint for her mother to hear. Indeed, it is most probable that Ceres was then 1,000 miles off, making the corn grow in some far distant country. Nor could it have availed her poor daughter even had she been within hearing. For no sooner did Proserpina begin to cry out than the stranger leaped to the ground, caught the child in his arms, and again mounting the chariot, shook the reins, and shouted to the 4 black horses to set off. They immediately broke into so swift a gallop that it seemed rather like flying through the air than running along the earth. In a moment, Proserpina lost sight of the pleasant vale of Enna, in which she had always dwelled. Another instant, and even the summit of Mount Etna had become so blue in the distance that she could scarcely distinguish it from the smoke that gushed out of its crater. But still the poor child screamed, and scattered her apron full of flowers along the way, and left a long cry trailing behind the chariot. And many mothers, to whose ears it came, ran quickly to see if any mischief had befallen their children. But Mother Ceres was a great way off, and could not hear the cry. As they rode off, the stranger did his best to soothe her. "Why should you be so frightened,
Jesus
my pretty
Christ.
child?" said he,
You
trying
psychopath.
to soften his rough voice. "I promise not to do you any harm."
There you go.
Why?
First sign that you're gonna die.
Flowers. Wait till we come to my palace, and I will give you a garden full of prettier flowers than those, all made of pearls and diamonds and rubies. Can you guess who I am? They call my name Pluto.
Pluto.
Diamonds and all other precious stones. Every atom of the gold and silver that lies under the earth belongs to me, to say nothing of the copper and iron, and of the coal mines which supply me with abundance of fuel. Do you see this splendid crown upon my head? You may have it for a plaything. Oh, we shall be very good friends, and you will find me more agreeable than you expect when once we get out of this troublesome sunshine. Let me go home, cried Proserpina. Let me go home. My home is better than your mother's, answered King Pluto. It is a palace all made of gold with crystal windows. And because there is little or no sunshine thereabouts, the apartments are illuminated with diamond lamps. You never saw anything half so magnificent as my throne. If you like, you may sit down on it and be my little queen.
Jesus, he's a creeper.
I will sit on the footstool. I don't care for golden palaces and thrones, sobbed Proserpina. Oh, my mother! Carry me back to my mother! But she might just as well have talked to the wind that whistled past them. For Pluto urged on his horses and went faster than ever.
Of course he did.
King Pluto had taken a road which now began to grow excessively gloomy. It was bordered on each side with rocks and precipices, between which the rumbling of the chariot wheels was reverberating with a noise like rolling thunder. The trees and bushes that grew in the crevices of the rocks had very dismal foliage. And by and by, although it was hardly noon, the air became obscured with a grey twilight. The black horses had rushed along so swiftly that they were already beyond the limits of the sunshine. But the duskier it grew, the more did Pluto's visage assume an air of satisfaction. After all, he was not an ill, especially when he left off twisting his features into a smile that did not belong to them. Proserpina peeped at his face through the gathering dusk, and hoped that he might not be so very wicked as she had first thought him.
Go there.
Ah, this twilight is truly refreshing, said King Pluto. After being so tormented with that ugly and impertinent glare of the sun, how much more agreeable is lamplight or torchlight, more particularly when reflected from diamonds. It will be a magnificent sight when we get to my palace. Is it much farther? Asked Proserpina. And will you carry me back when I've seen it? We will talk of that by and by, answered Pluto. We are just entering my dominions. See that tall gateway before us? When we pass those gates, we are at home. And there lies my faithful mastiff at the threshold. Cerberus! Cerberus! Come hither, my good dog.
Come hither.
So saying, Pluto pulled at the reins and stopped the chariot right between the tall, massive pillars of the gateway. The mastiff of which he had spoken got up from the threshold and stood on his hinder legs so as to put his forepaws on the chariot wheel. But my stars, what a strange dog it was. Why? He was a big, rough, ugly-looking monster with 3 separate heads, and each of them fiercer than the 2 others. But fierce as they were, King Pluto patted them all.
I must say
He
that
seemed as fond of his 3-headed dog as if it had
doesn't
been a
go on
sweet
there.
spaniel with silken ears and curly hair. Cerberus, on the other hand, was evidently rejoiced to see his master, and expressed his attachment, as other dogs do, by wagging his tail at a great rate. Proserpina's eyes being drawn to it by its brisk motion, she saw that this tail was neither more nor less than a live dragon, with fiery eyes and fangs that had a very poisonous aspect. And while the 3-headed Cerberus was fawning so lovingly on King Pluto, there was the dragon tail wagging against its will, and looking as cross and ill-natured as you can imagine on its own separate account. Will the dog bite me? Asked Proserpina, shrinking closer to Pluto. What an ugly creature he is.
Oh, never fear, answered his companion. He never harms people unless they try to enter my dominions without being sent for, or to get away when I wish to keep them here. Down, Cerberus! Now, my pretty Proserpina, we will drive off. On went the chariot, and King Pluto seemed greatly pleased to find himself once more in his own kingdom. He drew Proserpina's attention to the rich veins of gold
Amazing,
which
right
were
there.
seen among the rocks.
Hell
Pointed
yeah.
to several places where one stroke of a pickaxe would loosen a bushel of diamonds. All along the road, indeed, there were sparkling gems, which would have been of inestimable value above ground, but which were here reckoned of the meaner sort and hardly worth a beggar's stooping for. Not far from the gateway, they came to a bridge, which seemed to be built of iron. Pluto stopped the chariot and bade Proserpina look at the stream, which was gliding so lazily beneath it. Never in her life had she beheld so torpid, so black, so muddy-looking a stream. Its waters reflected no images of anything that was on the banks, and it moved as sluggishly as if it had quite forgotten which way it ought to flow, and had rather stagnate than flow either one way or the other. This is the river Lethe, observed King Pluto. Is it not a very pleasant stream?
No.
I think it's a very dismal one. It suits my taste, however, answered Pluto, who was apt to be sullen when anybody disagreed. At all events, its water has one very excellent quality. For a single draught of it makes people forget every care and sorrow that has hitherto tormented them. Only sip a little of it, my dear Proserpina, and you will instantly cease to grieve for your mother, and will have nothing in your memory that can prevent your being perfectly happy in my palace. I will send for some in a golden goblet the moment we arrive. Oh, no, 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 cried Proserpina, weeping afresh. I had 1,000 times rather be miserable with remembering my mother than be happy in forgetting her. That dear, dear mother, I never, never will forget her. We shall see, said
Wow.
Pluto. You do not know what fine times we will have in my palace. Here we are, just at the portal. These pillars are solid gold, I assure you. He alighted from the chariot, and taking Proserpina in his arms, carried her up a lofty flight of steps into the great hall of the palace. It was splendidly illuminated by means of large, precious stones of various hues, which seemed to burn like so many lamps, and glowed with 100-fold radiance all through the vast apartment. And yet there was a kind of gloom in the midst of this enchanted light. Nor was there a single object in the hall that was really agreeable to behold, except the little Proserpina herself, a lovely child, with one earthly flower, which she had not let fall from her hand. It is my opinion that even King Pluto had never been happy in his palace, and that this was the true reason why he had stolen away Proserpina, in order that he might have something to love, instead of cheating his heart any longer with his tiresome magnificence. And though he pretended to dislike the sunshine of the upper world, yet the effect of the child's presence, bedimmed as she was by her tears, was as if a faint and watery sunbeam had somehow or other found its way into the enchanted hall. Pluto now summoned his domestics,
Yes.
and bade them lose no time in preparing a most sumptuous banquet, and above all things, not to fail of setting a golden beaker of the water of Lethe by Proserpina's plate. I will neither drink that nor anything else, said Proserpina, nor will I taste a morsel of food, even if you keep me forever in your palace. I should be sorry for that, replied King Pluto, patting her cheek. For he really wished to be kind if he'd only known how. You are a spoiled child.
Jesus
I see, my
Christ.
little Proserpina. But when you see the nice things which my cook will make for you, your appetite will quickly come again. Then, sending for the head cook, he gave strict orders that all sorts of delicacies, such as young people are usually fond of, should be set before Proserpina. He had a secret motive in this, for you are to understand it is a fixed law that when persons are carried off to the land of magic, if they once taste any food there, they can never get back to their friends. Now, if King Pluto had been cunning enough to offer Proserpina some fruit, or bread and milk, which was the simple fare to which the child had always been accustomed, it is very probable that she would soon have been tempted to eat it. But he left the matter entirely to his cook, who, like all other cooks, considered nothing fit to eat unless it were rich pastry, or highly seasoned meat, or spiced sweet cakes, things which Proserpina's mother had never given her, and the smell of which quite took away her appetite instead of sharpening it. But my story must now clamber out of King Pluto's dominions and see what Mother Ceres has been about, since she was bereft of her daughter. You recollect the loud scream which Proserpina gave, just when the chariot was out of sight. Of all the child's outcries, this last shriek was the only one that reached the ears of Mother Ceres. She had mistaken the rumbling of the chariot wheels for a peal of thunder, and imagined that a shower was coming up, and that it would assist her in making the corn grow. But at the sound of Proserpina's shriek, she started, and looked about in every direction, not knowing whence it came, but feeling almost certain that it was her daughter's voice. It seemed so unaccountable, however, that the girl should have strayed over so many lands and seas, which she herself could not have traversed without the aid of her winged dragons, that the good Ceres tried to believe that it must be the child of some other parent, and not her own darling Proserpina, who had uttered his lamentable cry. Nevertheless, it troubled her with a vast many tender fears, such as are ready to bestir themselves in every mother's heart when she finds it necessary to go away from her dear children without leaving them under the care of some maiden aunt or other such faithful guardian. So she quickly left the field in which she'd been so busy, and as her work was not half done, the grain looked next day as if it needed both sun and rain, and as if it were blighted in the ear and had something the matter with its roots. The pair of dragons must have had very nimble wings, for in less than an hour, Mother Ceres had alighted at the door of her home. Knowing, however, that the child was fond of sporting on the seashore, she hastened thither as fast as she could, and there beheld the wet faces of the poor sea nymphs peeping over a wave. All this while, the good creatures had been waiting on the bank of sponge, and once every half minute or so had popped up their foreheads above water to see if their playmate were yet coming back. When they saw Mother Ceres, they sat down on the crest of the surf wave and let it toss them ashore at her feet. "Where is Proserpina?" cried Ceres. "Where is my child? Tell me, you naughty sea nymphs, have you enticed her under the sea?" "Oh, no, good Mother Ceres," said the innocent sea nymphs, tossing back their green ringlets and looking her in the face. "We never should dream of such a thing. Proserpina has been at play with us, it is true, but she left us a long while ago, meaning only to run a little way upon the dry land and gather some flowers for a wreath. This was early in the day, and we've seen nothing of her since." Ceres scarcely waited to hear what the nymphs had to say before she hurried off to make inquiries all through the neighborhood. But nobody told her anything that could enable the poor mother to guess what had become of Proserpina. A fisherman, it is true, had noticed her little footprints in the sand as he went homeward along the beach with a basket of fish. A rustic had seen the child stooping to gather flowers. Several persons had heard either the rattling of chariot wheels or the rumbling of distant thunder. And one old woman, while plucking vervain and catnip, had heard a scream, but supposed it to be some childish nonsense, and therefore did not take the trouble to look up. The stupid people! It took them such a tedious while to tell them nothing that they knew, and it was dark night before Mother Ceres found out that she must seek her daughter elsewhere. So she lighted a torch and set forth, resolving never to come back until Proserpina was discovered. In her haste and trouble of mind, she quite forgot her car and the winged dragons. Or it may be she thought that she could follow up the search more thoroughly on foot. At all events, this was the way in which she began her sorrowful journey, holding her torch before her and looking carefully at every object along the path. And as it happened, she had not gone far before she found one of the magnificent flowers which grew on the shrub that Proserpina had pulled up. Ah, thought Mother Ceres, examining it by torchlight. Here is mischief in this flower. The earth did not produce it by any help of mine, nor of its own accord. It is the work of enchantment, and it is therefore poisonous, and perhaps it has poisoned my poor child. But she put the poisonous flower in her bosom, not knowing whether she might ever find any other memorial of Proserpina. All night long, at the door of every cottage and farmhouse, Ceres knocked and called up the weary labourers to inquire if they had seen her child. And they stood, gaping and half asleep at the threshold, and answered her pityingly, and besought her to come in and rest. At the portal of every palace, too, she made so loud a summons that the menials hurried to throw open the gate, thinking that it must be some great king or queen who would demand a banquet for supper and a stately chamber to repose in. When they saw only a sad and anxious woman with a torch in her hand and a wreath of withered poppies on her head, they spoke rudely and sometimes threatened to set the dogs upon her. But nobody had seen Proserpina, nor could give Mother Ceres the least hint which way to seek her. Thus passed the night. Still she continued her search without sitting down to rest or stopping to take food, or even remembering to put out the torch. Although first the rosy dawn and then the glad light of the morning sun made its red flame look thin and pale. But I wonder what sort of stuff this torch was made of, for it burned dimly through the day, and the night was as bright as ever, and never was extinguished by the rain or wind in all the weary days and nights while Ceres was seeking for Proserpina. It was not merely of human beings that she asked tidings of her daughter. In the woods and by the streams, she met creatures of another nature, who used in those old times to haunt the pleasant and solitary places, and were very sociable with persons who understood their language and customs, as Mother Ceres did. Sometimes, for instance, she tapped with her finger against the knotted trunk of a majestic oak, and immediately its rude bark would cleave asunder, and forth would step a beautiful maiden, who was the hamadryad of the oak, dwelling inside of it, and sharing its long life, and rejoicing when its green leaves sported with the breeze. But not one of these leafy damsels had seen Proserpina. Then, going a little farther, Ceres would perhaps
Maybe, I don't think so, no.
gushing out of a pebbly hollow in the earth, and would dabble with her hand in the water. Behold, up through its sandy and pebbly bed, along with the fountain's gush, a young woman with dripping hair would arise, and stand gazing at Mother Ceres, half out of the water, and undulating up and down with its ever-restless motion. But when the mother asked whether her poor lost child had stopped to drink out of the fountain, the naiad, with weeping eyes, for these water nymphs had tears to spare for everybody's need, would answer, "No," in a murmuring voice, which was just like the murmur of the stream. Often, likewise, she encountered fauns, who looked like sunburned country people, except that they had hairy ears and little horns upon their foreheads, and the hinder legs of goats on which they gamboled merrily about the woods and fields. They were a frolicsome kind of creature, but grew as sad as their cheerful dispositions would allow when Ceres inquired for her daughter, and they had no good news to tell. But sometimes she came suddenly upon a rude gang of satyrs, who had faces like monkeys and horses' tails behind them, and who were generally dancing in a very boisterous manner with shouts of noisy laughter. When she stopped to question them, they would only laugh the louder and make new merriment out of the lone woman's distress.
Jesus.
How unkind are those ugly satyrs. And once, while crossing a solitary sheep pasture, she saw a personage named Pan, seated at the foot of a tall rock and making music on a shepherd's flute. He too had horns and hairy ears and goat's feet, but being acquainted with Mother Ceres, he answered her question as civilly as he knew how, and invited her to taste some milk and honey out of a wooden bowl. Neither could Pan tell her what had become of Proserpina, any better than the rest of these wild people. And thus Mother Ceres went wandering about for 9 long days and nights,
Jesus.
finding no trace of Proserpina, unless it were now and then a withered flower, and these she picked up and put in her bosom, because she fancied that they might have fallen from her poor child's hand. All day she travelled onward through the hot sun, and at night again the flame of the torch would redden and gleam along the pathway, and she continued her search by its light, without ever sitting down to rest.
It's a sad ass story. I think I'll listen to the other side.
On the 10th day, she chanced to espy the mouth of a cavern, within which, though it was bright noon everywhere else, there would have been only a dusky twilight, but it so happened that a torch was burning there. It flickered and struggled with the duskiness, but could not half light up the gloomy cavern with all its melancholy glimmer. Ceres was resolved to leave no spot without a search. So she peeped into the entrance of the cave and lighted it up a little more by holding her own torch before her. In so doing, she caught a glimpse of what seemed to be a woman, sitting on the brown leaves of the last autumn, a great heap of which had been swept into the cave by the wind. This woman, if woman it were, was by no means so beautiful as many of her sex, for her head, they tell me, was shaped very much like a dog's, and by way of ornament she wore a wreath of snakes around it. But Mother Ceres, the moment she saw her, knew that this was an odd kind of a person, who put all her enjoyment in being miserable, and never would have a word to say to other people unless they were as melancholy and wretched as she herself delighted to be. I am wretched enough now, thought poor Ceres, to talk with this melancholy Hecate, were she 10 times sadder than ever she was yet. So she stepped into the cave and sat down on a withered leaves by the dog-headed woman's side. In all the world, since her daughter's loss, she had found no other companion. Oh, Hecate, said she, if ever you lose a daughter, you will know what sorrow is. Tell me, for pity's sake, have you seen my poor child Proserpina pass by the mouth of your cavern? Now, answered Hecate in a cracked voice, and sighing betwixt every word or two.
Now, Mother Ceres, I have seen nothing of your daughter. But my ears, you must know, are made in such a way that all cries of distress and affright all over the world are pretty sure to find their way to them. 9 days ago, as I sat in my cave, making myself very miserable, I heard the voice of a young girl shrieking as if in great distress. Something terrible has happened to the child, you may rest assured. As well as I could judge, a dragon or some other cruel monster was carrying her away.
You kill me by saying so, cried Ceres, almost ready to faint. Where was the sound? And which way did it seem to go?
It passed very swiftly along, said Hecate, And at the same time, there was a heavy rumbling of wheels towards the eastward. I can tell you nothing more, except that in my honest opinion, you will never see your daughter again. The best advice I can give you is to take up your abode in this cavern, where we will be the two most wretched women in the world.
Not yet, Dark Hecate, replied Ceres.
Not yet.
But you first come with your torch and help me to seek for my lost child. And when there shall be no more hope of finding her, if that black day is ordained to come, then if you will give me room to fling myself down either on these withered leaves or on the naked rock, I will show you what it is to be miserable. But until I know that she has perished from the face of the earth, I will not allow myself space even to breathe. The dismal Hecate did not much like the idea of going abroad into the sunny world. But then she reflected that the sorrow of the disconsolate Ceres would be like a gloomy twilight round about them both. Let the sun shine ever so brightly, and that therefore she might enjoy her bad spirits quite as well as if she were to stay in the cave. So she finally consented to go. Both carrying torches, broad daylight and clear sunshine. The torchlight seemed to make it gloom, so that the people whom they met along the road could not very distinctly see their figures. And indeed, if they once caught a glimpse of Hecate with a wreath of snakes round her forehead, they generally thought it prudent to run away without waiting for a second glance. As the pair travelled along in this woebegone manner, a thought struck Ceres. There is one person, she exclaimed, who must have seen my poor child, and can doubtless tell what has become of her. Why did I not think of him before? It is Phoebus.
What? Said Hecate. The young man that always sits in the sunshine. Oh, pray do not think of going near him. He is a gay, light, frivolous young fellow, and will only smile in your face. And besides, there is such a glare of the sun about him that he will quite blind my poor eyes, which I have almost wept away already.
You have promised to be my companion, answered Ceres. Come, let us make haste, or the sunshine will be gone and Phoebus along with it. Accordingly, they went along in quest of Phoebus, both of them sighing grievously, and Hecate, to say the truth, making a great deal worse lamentation than Ceres. For all the pleasure she had, lay in deep misery, and therefore she made the most of it. By and by, after a pretty long journey, they arrived at the sunniest spot in the whole world. There they beheld a beautiful young man, with long curling ringlets, which seemed to be made of golden sunbeams. His garments were like light summer clouds, and the expression of his face was so exceedingly vivid that Hecate held her hands before her eyes, muttering that he ought to wear a black veil. Phoebus, for this was the very person whom they were seeking, had a lyre in his hands, and was making its chords tremble with sweet music, and at the same time singing a most exquisite song which he had recently composed. For besides a great many other accomplishments, this young man was renowned for his admirable poetry. As Ceres and her dismal companion approached him, Phoebus smiled on them so cheerfully that Hecate's wreath of snakes gave a spiteful hiss, and Hecate heartily wished herself back in her cave. But as for Ceres, she was too earnest in her grief either to know or care whether Phoebus smiled or frowned. Phoebus, exclaimed she, I am in great trouble and have come to you for assistance. Can you tell me what has become of my dear child Proserpina? Proserpina, did you call her name? Answered Phoebus, endeavoring to recollect, for there was such a continual flow of pleasant ideas in his mind that he was apt to forget what had happened no longer ago than yesterday. Ah, yes, I remember her now. A very lovely child indeed. I am happy to tell you, my dear madam, that I did see the little Proserpina not many days ago. You may make yourself perfectly easy about her. She is safe and in excellent hands. Oh, where is my dear child? Cried Ceres, clasping her hands and flinging herself at his feet. Why, said Phoebus. And as he spoke, he kept touching his lyre so as to make a thread of music run in and out among his words. As the little damsel was gathering flowers, and she has really a very exquisite taste for flowers, she was suddenly snatched up by King Pluto and carried off to his dominion. I have never been in that part of the universe, but the royal palace, I'm told, was built in a very noble style of architecture, and of the most splendid and costly material.
Oh, shut up, phone.
And all manner of precious stones will be your daughter's ordinary playthings. I recommend to you, my dear lady, to give yourself no uneasiness. Proserpina's sense of beauty will be duly gratified, and even in spite of a lack of sunshine, she will lead a very enviable life. Hush! Say not such a word, answered Ceres indignantly. What is there to gratify her heart? What are all the splendors you speak of without affection? I must have her back again. Will you go with me, Phoebus, to demand my daughter of this wicked Pluto? Pray excuse me, replied Phoebus with an elegant obeisance. I certainly wish you success, and regret that my own affairs are so immediately pressing that I cannot have the pleasure of attending you. Besides, I am not upon the best of terms with King Pluto. To tell you the truth, his three-headed mastiff would never let me pass the gateway, for I should be compelled to take a sheaf of sunbeams along with me, and those, you know, are forbidden things in Pluto's kingdom. Ah, Phoebus, said Ceres with bitter meaning in her words, you have a harp instead of a heart. Farewell. Will not you stay a moment, asked Phoebus, and hear me turn the pretty and touching story of Proserpina into extemporary verses?
Jesus.
And Ceres shook her head and hastened away, along with Hecate. Phoebus, who, as I have told you, was an exquisite poet, forthwith began to make an ode about the poor mother's grief. And if we were to judge of his sensibility by this beautiful production, he must have been endowed with a very tender heart. When a poet gets into the habit of using his heartstrings to make chords for his lyre, he may thrum upon them as much as he will without any great pain to himself. Accordingly, though Phoebus sang a very sad song, he was as merry all the while as were the sunbeams amid which he dwelled. Poor Mother Ceres had now
These cruel sons of bitches.
her daughter, but was not a whit happier than before. Her case, on the contrary, looked more desperate than ever. As long as Proserpina was above ground, there might have been hopes of regaining her. But now that the poor child was shut up within the iron gates of the king of the mines, at the threshold of which lay the three-headed Cerberus, there seemed no possibility of her ever making her escape. The dismal Hecate, who loved to take the darkest view of things, told Ceres that she had better come with her to the cavern and spend the rest of her life
Don't look like that piece.
Ceres answered that Hecate was welcome to go back thither herself, but that for her part, she would wander about the earth in quest of the entrance to King Pluto's dominions. And Hecate took her at her word, and hurried back to her beloved cave, frightening a great many little children with a glimpse of her dog's face as she went. Poor Mother Ceres. In her despair, she came to the dreadful resolution that not a stalk of grain, nor a blade of grass, not a potato, nor a turnip, nor any other vegetable that was good for man or beast to eat should be suffered to grow until her daughter were restored. She even forbade the flowers to bloom, lest somebody's heart should be cheered by their beauty. Now, as not so much as a head of asparagus ever presumed to poke itself out of the ground without the especial permission of Ceres, you may conceive what a terrible calamity had here fallen upon the earth. The husbandman ploughed and planted as usual, but there lay the rich black furrows, all as barren as a desert of sand. The pastures looked as brown in the sweet month of June as ever they did in chill November. The rich man's broad acres and the cottager's small garden patch were equally blighted. Every little girl's flower bed showed nothing but dry stalks. The old people shook their white heads and said that the earth had grown aged like themselves and was no longer capable of wearing the worn smile of summer on its face. It was really piteous to see the poor starving cattle and sheep, how they followed
No, I've
behind
tried that
Siri,
piece repeatedly.
lowing and bleating, as if their instinct taught them to expect help from her. And everybody that was acquainted with her power besought her to have mercy on the human race,
Half them.
and at all events to let the grass grow. But Mother Ceres, though naturally of an affectionate disposition, was now inexorable. Never, said she, if the earth is ever again to see any verdure, it must first grow along the path which my daughter will tread in coming back to me. Finally, as there seemed to be no other remedy, Quicksilver, otherwise known as Mercury, the messenger, was sent post-haste to King Pluto in hopes that he might be persuaded to undo the mischief he had done and to set everything right again by giving up Proserpine. Quicksilver accordingly made the best of his way to the great gate, took a flying leap right over the three-headed mastiff, and stood at the door of the palace in an inconceivably short time. The servants knew him both by his face and garb, for his short cloak and his winged cap and shoes, and his snaky staff had often been seen thereabouts in times gone by. He requested to be shown immediately into the king's presence, and Pluto, who heard his voice from the top of the stairs, and who loved to recreate himself with Quicksilver's merry talk, called out to him to come up. And while they settled their business together, we must inquire what Proserpina has been doing ever since we saw her last. The child had declared, as you may remember, that she would not taste a mouthful of food as long as she should be compelled to remain in King Pluto's palace. How she contrived to maintain her resolution, and at the same time to keep herself tolerably plump and rosy, is more than I can explain. But some young ladies, I am given to understand, possess the faculty of living on air. And Proserpina seems to have possessed it too. At any rate, it was now 6 months since she left the outside of the earth, and not a morsel, so far as the attendants were able to testify, had yet passed between her teeth. This was the more creditable to Proserpina, inasmuch as King Pluto had caused her to be tempted day after day with all manner of sweetmeats and richly preserved fruits and delicacies of every sort, such as young people are generally most fond of. But her good mother had often told her of the hurtfulness of these things, and for that reason alone, if there had been no other, she would have resolutely refused to taste them. All this time, being of a cheerful and active disposition, the little damsel was not quite so unhappy as you may have supposed. The immense palace had 1,000 rooms, and was full of beautiful and wonderful objects. There was a never-ceasing gloom, it is true, which half hid itself among the innumerable pillars, gliding before the child as she wandered among them, and treading stealthily behind her in the echo of her footsteps. Neither was all the dazzle of the precious stones, which flamed with their own light, worth one gleam of natural sunshine, nor could the most brilliant of the many-colored gems, which Proserpina had for playthings, vie with the simple beauty of the flowers she used to gather. But still, wherever the girl went, among those gilded halls and chambers, it seemed as if she carried nature and sunshine along, and as if she scattered dewy blossoms on her right hand and on her left. After Proserpina came, the palace was no longer the same abode of stately artifice and dismal magnificence that it had been before. The inhabitants all felt this, and King Pluto more than any of them. My own little Proserpina, he used to say, I wish you could like me a little better.
Fucking sick bastard.
Cloudy-natured persons have often
I've only kidnapped you.
bottom as those of a more cheerful character. If you would only stay with me of your own accord, it would make me happier than the possession of 100 such palaces as this. Ah, said Proserpina, you should have tried to make me like you before carrying me off. And the best thing you can do now is to let me go again. Then I might remember you sometimes, and think that you were as kind as you knew how to be. Perhaps, too, one day or other, I might come back and pay you a visit. No, answered Pluto with his gloomy smile. I will not trust you for that.
Jesus
You are too
Christ.
fond of living in the broad daylight, gathering flowers. What an idle
gems which I have ordered to be done for you, and which are richer than any in my crown, are they not prettier than a violet? Not half so pretty, said Proserpina, snatching the gems from Pluto's hand and flinging them to the other end of the hall. Oh, my sweet violet, shall I never see you again? And then she burst into tears. But young people's tears have very little saltness or acidity in them, and do not inflame the eyes so much as those of grown persons, so that it is not to be wondered at if a few moments afterwards Proserpina was sporting through the hall almost as merrily as she and the four sea nymphs had sported along the edge of the surf wave. King Pluto gazed after her and wished that he too was a child. And little Proserpina, when she turned
This guy's a sick
beheld the
fucker.
great king standing in his splendid hall and looking so grand, and so melancholy, and so lonely, was smitten with a kind of pity. She ran back to him, and for the first time in all her life, put her small, soft hand in his. I love you a little, whispered she, looking up in his face. Do you indeed, my dear child? Cried Pluto, bending his dark face down to kiss her. But Proserpina shrank away from the kiss, for though his features were noble, they were very dusky and grim. Well, I have not deserved it of you after keeping you a prisoner for so many months and starving you besides. Are you not terribly hungry? Is there nothing which I can get you to eat? In asking this question, the king of the mines had a very cunning purpose, for you will recollect, if Proserpina tasted a morsel of food in his dominions, she would never afterwards be at liberty to quit them. No, indeed, said Proserpina. Your head cook is always baking and stewing and roasting and rolling out paste and contriving one dish or another, which he imagines may be to my liking. But he might just as well save himself the trouble, poor fat little man that he is. I have no appetite for anything in the world, unless it were a slice of bread of my mother's own baking, or a little fruit out of her garden. When Pluto heard this, he began to see that he had mistaken the best method of tempting Proserpina to eat. The cook's made dishes and artificial dainties were not half so delicious, in the good child's opinion, as the simple fare to which Mother Ceres had accustomed her. Wondering that he never thought of it before, the king now sent one of his trusty attendants with a large basket to get some of the finest and juiciest pears, peaches, and plums which could anywhere be found in the upper world. Unfortunately, however, this was during the time when Ceres had forbidden any fruits or vegetables to
That's
grow.
right.
And after seeking
You
all
ain't
over
getting
the
shit,
earth,
dog.
Pluto's servant found only a single pomegranate, and that so dried up as not to be worth eating. Nevertheless, since there was no better to be had, he brought his dry, old, withered pomegranate home to the palace, put it on magnificent golden salver, and carried it up to Proserpina. Now, it happened, curiously enough, that just as the servant was bringing the pomegranate to the back door of the palace, our friend Mercury had gone up the front steps on his errand to get Proserpina away from King Pluto. As soon as Proserpina saw the pomegranate on the golden salver, she told the servant he'd better take it away again. I shall not touch it, I assure you, said she. If I were ever so hungry, I should never think of eating such a miserable, dry pomegranate as that. It is the only one in the world, said the servant. He set down the golden salver with the wizened pomegranate upon it and left the room. When he was gone, Proserpina could not help coming close to the table and looking at this poor specimen of dried fruit with a great deal of eagerness. For to say the truth, on seeing something that suited her taste, she felt all the 6 months' appetite taking possession of her at once. To be sure, it was a very wretched-looking pomegranate, and seemed to have no more juice in it than an oyster shell. But there was no choice of such things in King Pluto's palace. This was the first fruit she'd seen there, and the last she was ever likely to see. Unless she ended up with each case, it would grow drier than it already was, and be wholly unfit to eat. At least I may smell it, thought Proserpina. So she took up the pomegranate and applied it to her nose. And somehow or other, being in such close neighborhood to her mouth, the fruit found its way into that little red cave. Dear me, what an everlasting pity. Before Persephone knew what she was about, her teeth had actually bitten it of their own accord.
No.
Just as this fatal deed was done, the door of the apartment opened, and in came King Pluto, followed by Mercury, who had been urging him to let his little prisoner go. At the first noise of their entrance, Persephone withdrew the pomegranate from her mouth. But Mercury, whose eyes were very keen and his wits the sharpest that ever anybody had, perceived that the child was a little confused, and seeing the empty salver, he suspected that she'd been taking a sly nibble of something or other.
Jesus Christ.
Pluto, he never guessed at the secret. My little Persephone, said the king, sitting down and affectionately drawing her between his knees. Here is Mercury, who tells me that a great many misfortunes have befallen innocent people on account of my detaining you in my dominions. To confess the truth, I myself had already reflected that it was an unjustifiable act to take you away from your good mother. But then you must consider, my dear child, that this vast palace is apt to be very gloomy, although the precious stones certainly shine very bright, and that I am not of the most cheerful disposition, and that therefore it was a natural thing to seek for the society of some merrier creature than myself. I hoped you would take my crown for a plaything, and me, you laugh, naughty Persephone, me, grim as I am, for a playmate.
Yeah, a playmate.
Not so extremely silly, whispered Persephone. You have really amused me very much sometimes. Thank you, said King Pluto rather dryly. But I can see plainly enough that you think my palace a dusky prison, and me the iron-hearted keeper of it. And an iron heart I should surely have, if I could detain you here any longer, my poor child, when it is now 6 months since you tasted food. I give you your liberty. Go with Mercury. Hasten home to your dear mother. Now, although you may not have supposed it, Persephone found it impossible to take leave of poor King Pluto without some regrets, and a good deal of compunction for not telling him about the pomegranate. She even shed a tear or two, thinking how lonely and cheerless the great palace would seem to him, with all its ugly glare of artificial light, after she herself, his only little ray of natural sunshine, whom he had stolen, to be sure, but only because he valued her so much, after she should have departed. I know not how many kind things she might have said to the disconsolate king of the mines, had not Mercury hurried her away. Come along quickly, whispered he in her ear, or his majesty may change his royal mind, and take care, above all things, that you say nothing of what was brought you on the golden salver. In a very short time they passed the great gateway, leaving the three-headed Cerberus barking and yelping and growling, with threefold din behind them, and emerged upon the surface of the earth. It was delightful to behold, as Proserpina hastened along, how the path grew verdant behind and on either side of her. Wherever she set her blessed foot, there was at once a dewy flower. The violets gushed up along the wayside. The grass and the grain began to sprout with tenfold vigor and luxuriance, to make up for the dreary months that had been wasted in barrenness. The starved cattle immediately set to work grazing after their long fast, and ate enormous
Fast.
and got up at midnight to eat more. But I can assure you it was a busy time of year with the farmers, when they found the summer coming upon them with such a rush. Nor must I forget to say that all the birds in the whole world hopped about upon the newly blossoming trees and sang together in a prodigious ecstasy of joy. Mother Ceres had returned to her deserted home, and was sitting disconsolately on the doorstep with her torch burning in her hand. She had been idly watching the flame for some moments past, when all at once it flickered and went out. What does this mean, thought she? It was an enchanted torch, and should have kept burning till my child came back. Lifting her eyes, she was surprised surprised to see a sudden verdure flashing over the brown and barren fields. Exactly as you may have observed, a golden hue gleaming far and wide across the landscape from the just risen sun. "Does the earth disobey me?" exclaimed Mother Ceres indignantly. "Does it presume to be green when I have bidden it be barren until my daughter shall be restored to my arms?" "Then open your arms, dear mother," cried a well-known voice, "and take your little daughter into them." And Proserpina came running and flung herself upon her mother's bosom. Their mutual transport is not to be described. The grief of their separation had caused both of them to shed a great many tears, and now they shed a great many more, because their joy could not so well express itself in any other way. When their hearts had grown a little more quiet, Mother Ceres looked anxiously at Proserpina. "My child," said she, "did you taste any food while you were in King Pluto's palace?" "Dearest mother," answered Proserpina, "I will tell you the whole truth. Until this very morning, not a morsel of food had passed my lips. But today they brought me a pomegranate, a very dry one it was, and all shriveled up, till there was little left of it but seeds and skin. And having seen no fruit for so long a time, and being faint with hunger, I was tempted just to bite it. The instant I tasted it, King Pluto and Mercury came into the room. I had not swallowed a morsel, but, dear mother, I hope it was no harm. But 6 of the pomegranate seeds, I'm afraid, remained in my mouth." "Ah, unfortunate child and miserable bee," exclaimed Ceres. "For each of those 6 pomegranate seeds, you must spend 1 month of every year in King Pluto's palace. You are but half restored to your mother. Only 6 months with me, and 6 with that good-for-nothing King of Darkness." "Do not speak so harshly of poor King Pluto," said Proserpina, kissing her mother. "He has some very good qualities, and I really think I can bear to spend 6 months in his palace, if he will only let me spend the other 6 with you. He certainly did very wrong to carry me off, but then, as he says, it was but a dismal sort of life for him to live in that great gloomy place all alone, and it has made a wonderful change in his spirits to have a little girl to run upstairs and down. There is some comfort in making him so happy. And so, upon the whole, dearest mother, let us be thankful that he is not to keep me the whole year round."
What a sick fucking story. It's a sick ass story. All right. I've completed enough for this session.